Massini and I sat down with two incredible women, Deborah Castrilli and Evangelia Kambites, to discuss their experiences as biracial actors in today's industry. We value and appreciate all Black lives, biracial, female, trans, queer, and everything in between. Enjoy. Have either of you been submitted for auditions or character breakdowns that ask for someone exotic or ethnic or a specific race that you do not identify with? And how do you navigate those situations?
Deb, why don't you go first?
Okay, so for me, I didn't have an agent up until a couple months ago, and so I just didn't, which was great. And then I only had one experience recently in which I was asked to audition for something, and I read the description and it was explicitly talking about Indigenous people, and I was like, this is not great. So in the audition, I was like, what's going on? I'm not Indigenous. And they were like, oh, we've kind of broadened the parameters now because we don't have enough people. And I was like, okay. And then I was like, well, I'll address this further if anything even moves forward, which it didn't. And then that was basically my experience. And it was with a room with people of color. So I was kind of trusting them to hopefully make whatever right decision. I wasn't really sure. It was like a reenactment of Shakespeare. So I wasn't really sure what they were planning on doing with it, or if they really were hard set on the Indigenous role. But I was like, I'm not doing this if this is, Indigenous. I'm not Indigenous. But yeah, that happens all the time, obviously. I'm sure we can all speak to that. Even with, I'm again new to the industry, so even with having vocal lessons and people being like, oh, but you could pass as Spanish. Italian's close to Spanish. And I'm like, no, it's not. I'm not. So yeah, always. It always happens, but less because I've had more control, I think less for me, but I'm sure you can speak a lot to that, Benji.
Yeah, I think that it certainly still happens. I think for theater, and it is changing, I think, because we are taking back our autonomy and our power in terms of what we are auditioning for or what we're willing to do. But certainly earlier on in my career, I remember I was doing Avenue Q out west, and the arts club was auditioning for In the Heights. And I remember thinking to myself, there are Afro-Latina people, like we exist. And I remember thinking I would rather go in as a person of color, even though I have no Latin lineage that I know of. I would rather go in as a person of color and put diversity on that stage than see Nina get played by a white person. And that was a really difficult internal battle for myself because I recognized that it wasn't my space. I recognized that the excuse that would be used in Vancouver is that they don't have enough actors of color. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of battled that, and I went in and I didn't book the show at all. And a white woman was cast as Nina. She's wildly talented and a friend of mine. And we have discussed that, and she felt pretty icky about it. And I think they had one actual Latin person in that show. And so I think that there's lots of times, because I think being biracial does offer some sense of racial ambiguity. I think I look Black. I think that's pretty clear, but people will often think that I am Cuban or Spanish or whatever. And so I have been submitted for the racially ambiguous, like Latin characters. And I no longer accept those roles. Like if somebody was like, oh, I want you to play Maria in West Side Story, that is a dream, but that's not for me. Like there are Latin actors who deserve a part. Just like you wouldn't ask a Latin person to play Celie in The Color Purple. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just so it's no longer something that when I was younger, I think I was like, diversity, like we're all in this together, but that erases everybody's place. So I think for theater, it can be trickier because companies believe they cannot find the races for which the roles are written. I think for and are like so story specific. I think for film and TV, they can sometimes get away with like changing the backstory of the character or changing something to fit,
right,
you know, a different narrative. It's also, it reminds me a little bit of a conversation I had with my former agent about like, I will no longer go out for like stereotypical Black roles. So don't submit me for those. You know, just don't.
Yeah. And by that you mean like the hookers or the like what caricatures almost of Black people by that. Yeah. Okay. And then on the same sort of topic, in light of this Black Lives Matter movement that's happening right now, a lot of TV shows have been coming out and saying, oh, I'm sorry, it's so ridiculous. They've been saying we're no longer going to have white actors voice our biracial or Black characters or cartoons that are, so like Apu from The Simpsons, Missy from Big Mouth. What else? There's someone that Kristen Bell plays in a show.
Oh yeah, I can't remember. Or like the Golden Girls taking off that one episode where they're wearing mud masks and they're like, it's blackface. I'm like, but it
murder is arrested. Like, I don't care about the rest of this. But anyway, I digress. How do you guys feel about if you were ever in a situation where you had to voice act, let's say, and not necessarily for a white character, but for like an Asian character or an Indigenous character? Would you feel the same way when it comes to voice acting?
It's I was thinking about this the other day because there are if you are asking, and this shouldn't even happen, but if you are asking a voice actor to put on an accent or something very specific to that culture, then the onus is on the actor to decide whether or not that is something they're comfortable with. If you are somebody like Hank Azaria who voices Apu on The Simpsons, and you are comfortable voicing a caricature of a race that is not your own for laughs, then you need to evaluate why you're comfortable doing that. And he's been doing that voice for 30 years. I think the opportunity should first be given to actors of color to play roles that are like even animated roles that are for actors of color. That said, if it doesn't matter to the story, I might not mind as much. If it's just like, it's a Black actor who sounds like a transatlantic or like a really neutral accent, then I may not mind as much. If it's a Black character and the story doesn't center around race, I may not mind as much. I would prefer that opportunities be given to people of color to do the work. And I think often the excuse falls on the back of, well, we just can't find them. And that's incorrect.
100%. And I also am recognizing more as I address my privilege within all of this is that, yeah, we need to find these people and hopefully try to acknowledge that we can empower people to get in these positions. Like, if you're not finding them, usually you're not trying hard enough. That being said, like you're saying, the background and all of that comes into play. Voice acting I haven't really done much of either, so I haven't even thought about that vein of what I would do. But I think all your points are valid, Vanjie. I just think, yeah, what can I do to try to empower and bring people to the table that actually aren't having a voice in these situations? Why am I being offered this first? What about me is more palatable to you than XYZ? Do you know what I mean? Those are questions I've been asking myself more. especially moving forward with work. So I think the same would apply with voice acting.
Yeah, I recently was auditioning for a new animated film, and the character was Brazilian, and I was like, are they expected to have a Brazilian accent? Like, I don't think I ever got a clear answer. Anyway, I didn't end up booking the work because of some union things, but I was like, ooh, I don't know if she's like a fun spy character, then, and it happens to be that it's set in Brazil. Like, is that wrong to just do like a neutral voice? If you're wanting me to put on a Brazilian accent or Portuguese accent, I'm not going to do that, because why would I do that? Why would I do that poorly too? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not like I'm going to do it well. Like, like so rude to Portuguese, like to Brazilians and Portuguese speaking people. Like, sorry. So it's hard, especially because I feel like because we as actors of color feel like, I feel like sometimes we don't feel like there's enough opportunity. So when opportunity comes, I think there's an instinctual panic that's like, well, I gotta get it.
Right. But I also think that, like, adding to all of your points, I also think that it's alarming about the people that are making these decisions too, right? Or creating these characters, like, especially asking for specific people of color. Like, if you're creating a character that is of a specific race or ethnicity, I'm like, I wonder, well, are these people that are making these characters that same race and ethnicity? Why you want that, or why it matters in some ways? Like, I feel like there needs to be people in the rooms making these decisions too, and usually that's not the case. It's usually just white people looking to play up a stereotype. That's why they look for specific people of color, or, oh, it doesn't matter what type of Asian you are, or that you're Asian at all. Like, go ahead, you know. I feel like there needs to be specific representation when you're doing specific characters, you know.
And add to that, just like, sometimes they'll just make basically a neutral character with the whole back, and then just throw on, let's just make them Brazilian, just to like say we did something, but it actually doesn't inform anything about what they've constructed, but it's just to like fill a quota. And then that's where it becomes confusing, because you're like, well, does this actually define anything about this person? And did you just do this because you wanted to just say you had a person of color, or did you actually construct the character with this in mind and actually give it depth with their background, which is a very different thing.
It's so funny because I was watching Frozen. I was watching Frozen, and I thought to myself, wow, there's really no people of color in this animated film. Okay, it's all white people. And then they make Frozen 2, and there's one black person, and I'm like, okay, there's your diversity. You know, it was really interesting to me to see that, you know, like, that they feel like if they just throw one in there, then it makes everything better. And then on top of that, like in Frozen 2, they had that, they apparently signed a treaty with a specific indigenous group. I don't know which one, but they signed a treaty about when they were speaking about the theme of Frozen 2. But then all of the actors or the singers singing the background, like the vocals for it, the actual actor, are all of them are white. I'm like, so it doesn't matter that you signed this indigenous treaty. Do you know what I mean? Does it even matter? Like, as much as on the screen we're seeing representation, but the people that are getting the work are not those same people that you're presenting on television, you know?
Have either of you ever been able to play your race, black and white, on stage to date? What was that experience like for you? And if you haven't, why do you think that is?
I've only ever done it once, and it wasn't spoken out loud that was the case, because the character I was playing was in sort of like a Greek chorus of characters, and so none of us had like
lines or anything. But we were playing the ancestors to the people on stage in a play called The Adventures of a Black Girl in Search of God by Janet Sears. And in the sort of family tree lineage, Janet had my parents as a Black man and a white woman. And I think the actor who played my brother in the show, I think he's also biracial as well. So, but that was the only time. It was nice to see the representation. It would be great to see more of that in shows where the characters have, you know, more presence, more dialogue and things like that. But that was the only sort of instance for me.
I've had two instances. My first was playing Squeak in The Color Purple, in which she was explicitly a mixed race woman, and I was very excited to portray this role. And then I was uncomfortable as well because I had to acknowledge my privilege in a room full of Black people. Her being a light-skinned woman was pivotal to the story as far as allowing her to take advantage of that and use that to get what she needed, which was at the time a man, and then move on to becoming a singer. But I had to sit with that and think to myself, well, I was always just being like, I don't think these things, like I don't think I'm better than anyone here, blah blah blah. But then I had to sit with that privilege and realize that this is kind of something you benefit from too, whether you like it or not. And so that was an interesting moment of realization for me throughout that process. And then this year I got to play Viola Desmond, which was incredible, and she is a Canadian civil rights activist, and a pivotal part as well is about her being light-skinned, of mixed race. Actually, it came out further that her mom did have some Black in her, so both her parents were Black, but she was very fair-skinned anyway, and this was just a common discussion throughout the work. But I could sit with my own work personally through that as a mixed race person and not focus as much about my privilege within it, but just do the work telling the story because I had addressed it previously a bit more, I guess. But yeah, I've been very fortunate in being able to do that a couple times. And it was interesting in that role that we kind of delved into the idea of hair. Of course, it's all about hair, but she was trying to use, I guess, her education. She went and got educated from Madam C.J. Walker in the States, and she tried to use that education, bring it back to Nova Scotia, and kind of empower the woman in her community by teaching them how to relax their own hair and make their hair look professional, right? And we had one scene that properly addressed the idea of the new wave of women who are going to come up after her being like, no, actually my natural hair is amazing. And it's interesting when you have this privilege, which she did to a certain degree, and she's trying to empower women around her and lift them up and bring them to this table and be like, you can be professional too. And in her eyes, she's doing good work, but really it's reinforcing what society has always taught us. And so it was interesting to have those conversations within the story, within her character, and that internal struggle that she felt too about what she was doing and bringing to her community. So it was very meaningful for me. So yeah.
And then just for some context, Deb, so you've gotten to do it twice, and Van, you've done it once. And how long have you guys been working professionally? Just to get a sense of like how often or how not often this comes by.
Yeah, I've been working professionally for 2 years now.
I've been professionally doing this for 8 years.
So they need to do better.
Yeah.
Next question. So, do the conversations differ when you're talking to either your white versus your Black parent or other family members about race and the current climate in the US and Canada, i.e. police brutality, the rampant racism, the protests, etc.?
So for me, yes. It's funny because my dad is very religious and has been part of a church for over 30 years that is predominantly Black. I would say like I haven't gone since I was a kid, but he's probably when I was going, one of a handful of white people, and he's surrounded by hundreds of Black people all the time. He's talking about my mom. He's immersed. He's like, Jamaican food. It's a lot. Anyway. So anyway, and still during this time, he called me a couple weeks ago and was like, how have you been? And I'm like, not good. He's like, why? And I'm like, because of everything, you know, people are dying. And he's just like, yeah, but you can't. And he is like, he hangs out with Black people all the time. And it still is just like, the conversation is still, but our relationship is very different. My mom and I are very close. And it's just a completely different relationship. But that being said, it's just like leaps and bounds. And that's someone who actually is chosen to be around a lot of Black people all the time. Like, he's at his church multiple times a week. And so I can't imagine if there are some people who there's people who are, I guess, who have entered a interracial relationship and think that maybe this doesn't exist, or color doesn't exist, or I love you for you. And I've seen that even within my own family to a certain degree with some of my relatives who have had similar relationships. And I've been like, you haven't taught your kids about historically Black colleges, or just these things that seem obvious to me, and it's not even in my own country, but things that I know about. But yeah, sometimes it's just that, yeah, it's been interesting. That's my take on it. But anyway, go ahead, Banshee.
Yeah, my dad is also white and very, very religious, to the point where I try to limit the conversations I have with him, and not because he's not completely aware and horrified by everything, but the solution to him is prayer. And I'm like, well, that can only take you so far. So it can get a little bit frustrating. He also is concerned about my safety, and he sees what's happening to the police. And so, and with COVID and everything, it's encouraging me to not go out to protests. I'm not going to protest because I have some health issues that prevent me from being able to be on the front lines. And if it wasn't a pandemic, I would be there. My mom, she's a Black woman from Uganda and has been in North America since the early 70s. And so she's experienced it across the board. And I find that I'm just limiting the conversations that I'm having with my family. I'm finding I'm having many more conversations with my friends, specifically my Black female friends, because that feels like a more constructive use of my time. My mom sent me this video of, like, I don't know, one of these, like, America's Got Talent or one of these X Factor whatevers, of this older Black man who had been imprisoned for 37 years for a crime he did not commit. And he was released once they got, like, DNA evidence, and he was released. And so he goes on X Factor and, you know, tells his story, and everybody's like, oh, so sad, da, da, da. Proceeds to sing something, like, mediocrely, let's be honest, like, was not a great singer by any stretch. And I was like, and so, you know, everybody's like, yeah, cheering, da, da, da. And my mom sent this to me, like, one morning, and I sent her a text, but I was like, thanks for this bummer first thing in the morning, Mom. She's like, it shows the resiliency of spirit. And I was like, because the white powers imprisoned this man for 37, like, she's like, but the white people were clapping the hardest in the video. And I was like, Mom, I can't talk to you right now. Like, and she's not foolish. She's not ignorant. She's choosing to see the potential good in things. And I'm like, this is performative. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to have conversations, I think, with older generations. My parents are in their 70s, and they lived through a different kind of movement than we are currently living through. So I find it tough to have the conversations that can be constructive with older people all the time. So because right now it feels like it's our generation that is following in the footsteps of our parents' generation and of our grandparents' generation. figuring out how we can make a difference, because we're the ones maybe more actively on the ground right now. That feels more productive to me than trying to talk to my parents. God bless them, but it's just they have fought. They're tired too. You know, it's our turn.
Yeah.
All right, next question. So that being said, do you identify with one side of your heritage more than the other, especially when it comes to storytelling? Are you able to tap into one side more than the other?
I don't like the idea of tapping into a side to me, because I get where it's coming from, but I feel like this is the constant dilemma of people thinking like, oh, it's like we're split in the middle and we have all, it's like, you know what I mean? We have all of these factors have encompassed and made me who I am. Both heritages have mixed in and influenced me, you know? Obviously, I present as a Black woman. People don't look at me. If I ever say I'm like, my dad is Italian, they're like, oh, no, he's not. Oh, no, but he is. And I'm like, yeah, you asked, so here we are having this conversation. But people just, they choose to see what they see, which happens to be that I'm a Black woman. And I'm proud of that. I take extreme pride in that. And then I recognize, though, that part of my heritage is not seen. So sometimes I've had people ask me, like, do you even care about your Italian side? Like, do you connect with that? Which is, first of all, not anyone's business. But of course I do. Like, I've grown up with my grandparents and all these people, like, taking care of me and loving me and exposing me to so many different things. And I'm proud of that. But right now, the stories that need to be told are our stories, like stories of resilience in the Black community, especially. And so I think that's why I've been more so drawn or put in positions of being able to tell those stories, because that's how I walk through the world. I will never be acknowledged as a white woman, not that I want to be, but can you imagine? I don't, it's very confusing. And I'm a Black woman who is biracial, but that's how I move through the world, and that's my experience. So I would love for someday to be able to create work, maybe I'll have to create myself, that can encompass all the facets of me, because that would be a dream come true. But just like tapping into one side to me is like difficult, because everything has kind of, I guess, merged to really form my experience. You know, I can't necessarily fully disregard one or the other. Although I did primarily grow up with my mother, who was Black. My parents were divorced, so that obviously influenced me a lot more. Having a Black woman as a role model is huge. Whereas if maybe my mother was white, my father was Black, maybe I'd have a different experience in what it means to be a Black woman and take pride in that. I don't know, maybe it would be different. Maybe I'd have less of a connection to it. It's hard to say, but yeah.
I think that's a really valid point. Having a Black mother when you're biracial, I think, is a very different thing. I think that mothers and their nurturing role in our lives plays a different part when you're biracial and your mother is Black. I'm in the same boat. I'm half Greek. Just like you, Deb, I walk through the world presenting as a Black woman. People are often surprised to find out that I am biracial. That has been the case my entire life in every space. I remember when I was a kid and I would go stay, my parents were divorced too, and I would go and stay with my dad and my stepmom, both of whom were white, and people would assume that I was adopted. And I'm like, no, I'm genetically his, like it's, you know. So I think that by default, I find myself identifying more with being Black, not necessarily being Ugandan, even though I am, but like the way that I move through the world is as a, like you said, as a Black woman. So everything that I do is colored by that lens. Every choice I make, every choice I don't make, when I have to decide on the safety of going somewhere. Do I want to stay home today, or is it safe enough for me to go XYZ, you know? But like, I remember when my Big Fat Greek Wedding came out, and I was like the Greekest person you'd ever met. I was I was like, this is my jam. These are my people. Opa, give me the uza. Like, it was like a whole thing.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that I'm Greek. I love the fact that I'm Greek. I love the fact that I'm Ugandan. You know, when I got married, I had all of my aunts did like the traditional Ugandan dance for the bride and groom, and like I sort of pushed back on that. I was like, no, I just don't want anything like da 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 da. And I'm so happy that we did it. And it wasn't anything to do with like being embarrassed or whatever. I was just like, I just want it to be really low key. And it was like one of the highlights of the night, and it was so important, right? And so growing up with my mom, like being with my mom, and like she purposefully engaged me in the Ugandan community. Like I definitely have a connection to that side of me, in a holistic way, more so than my Greek side. And because I am Black, that's how I move, you know?
Thank you for humoring me in that question. It's difficult to ask questions without being offensive, and to like really be careful of how you word things, because words matter. I'm so of that mind. So thank you for humoring me and answering that question. I'm not ignorant. I just needed to ask it so that
I didn't think you were. Don't worry. It's a question a lot more wondering though, so.
Of course. And I think it's important to share your stories. So we now come to our last. Does representation matter?
The answer is yes. Obviously, if you're new to this party, get on board. This is not news. Hello. Yes. But like in all facets, like I was just saying, if I could hopefully even create work that really like embodies my own story, embodies my experience as a biracial person. I remember, I think I saw, it was at this event Massini and I did for Women's Day, and I saw Melindy do a piece about her experience of being biracial and moving through this Canada versus Kenya, maybe?
Kenya, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember I was like, I feel so seen. Like, I just felt she was obviously very beautiful, and it's like in how she was portraying her story, but I was just like, oh my gosh, someone just put into words my whole life. And it was amazing, and I was so emotional, and I mean, I don't even know her at all, but I just felt like, yeah, I felt amazing just being seen like that. And so yes, representation matters on all levels, and I hope we can see more of it, but even with biracial stories, because there's so many people out there who feel like they don't fit into any box, which is unfortunate. I personally don't feel like that anymore, although growing up sometimes there were people who'd be like you're not Black enough for the Black kid, you're not white enough. That's a very real thing, and it still happens all the time. And so I don't think these stories are told as much as we like, but you know, there's a lot of stories that really need to be told. So yes,
yeah, I think growing up watching TV, watching theater, you know, like my favorite shows growing up were Fresh Prince, Family Matters, Martin Lawrence show, like just like anything Black I could get my hands on were like my favorite shows. And it's like something as simple as like my mom buying me a Black doll. You know, she like didn't buy me Barbies. She like sought out Black dolls so that I would have a Black doll to play with. And that was really important. And to see characters on screen who looked like me, to see characters on stage who looked like me, made me believe that I could do the work, that it was possible. And it's, if you don't see yourself, then how do you know that you belong? And if we're not represented, and that's, and just like Deb said, that's representation across the board. That's racial diversity, that is gender diversity, that is sexual orientation diversity. Like it's any kind of representation, right? It's any marginalized voice that doesn't get the spotlight, that doesn't get the platform. It's the difference between choosing to pursue something huge or not. You know, if there are stories that I see that are for us by us, then I know that there's a place for me. It's like when I decided I wouldn't do tokenized roles anymore. I was like, that representation is false. That representation serves the white man. That representation is inauthentic. And I didn't want to do that anymore. And when I was doing for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough, I remember being at the little corner grocery store near my place here, and a young Black girl was staring at me, and like anybody who knows me, Tara, knows that I hate everybody just by default. And like I don't like to be I just please don't bother me, like whatever. And so I can always like feel, like when people are looking at me, I can like feel it. And so like I could feel her staring at me, and so I like looked at her, and she was like, "Were you in for Colored Girls?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I was." And she's like, "I'm so and so, and I'm a new actor, and I saw the show." And it was like, she basically was like on the verge of tears, saying how incredible it was to see 7 Black women on stage in Toronto telling Black stories. And she's like, I have never seen that much Blackness on stage, and certainly not that many Black women. And she was like, it has changed my perception of what can be done on stage. And I was like, girl, like it like cut through my center that this like young new actor was like, you guys give me hope that I can do it, and you prove that our stories are worth telling. And if you don't see it, it's hard to recognize that A, it's there, B, it's worth pursuing, and C, it has value. You know, so the representation is, when everything is white all the time, it's impossible to feel like you belong. Kimmy Trung just said this perfectly. Like, if you have a white piece of paper and you put one color dot on it, that does not make a rainbow. You know, that was like the perfect analogy. And that's why the representation is so important. I'm done talking now.
I was just going to add that I spoke about this recently, but I was talking about my experience growing up. My mom is very artistic, does a lot of music, etc. So I was always exposed to the arts as a means of, you know, like an actual thing to pursue. Like, I knew this was a thing since I was a kid. I knew it was hard. I mean, I was like, this looks like the worst thing in the world. But at the same time, I knew it was real. Like, I knew it was a tangible thing you can do. And still, most of my life, I never was like, I can do that. Even though my mom was in my own house doing it. Why is that? Because when I would go outside and I would go watch media and I would go watch theater in Halifax particularly, none of that was there. And if I'm someone who actually had the privilege to watch someone in my own house who I love grow up around all of that exposure and still really take me, like, I really didn't think, I was like, I couldn't do that though. That's not something I can do because I just didn't see it. Even though I saw her doing it, I was like, but me though, like, and that just shows you, like, imagine people who have never had any exposure and are sitting at home, they have no grasp of what's out there for them and what they can experience. And that to me is why representation matters, especially. Like, you can have all the privilege in the world, which to me, I felt like I was very privileged to witness all that. And I still was like, but I can't do that for the longest time.
Yeah. I feel like we've probably, all 4 of us have, you know, growing up, doing the artsy things, taking the piano lessons, the dance lessons, whatever. I know where Tara and Deb grew up. Zini, where did you grow up? Toronto?
I grew up in Toronto, yeah.
In Toronto. Okay, so like you lived in the most diverse city, grew up in the most diverse city of all of us. I grew up in Ottawa, and I was the only person of color, and I'm saying person of color because literally like there was not even anything, like it was just me in my dance classes. I think at my piano and voice school as well, on my soccer team, like the only one. And so when you are the only one, and I remember being in ballet, like I stopped dancing when I was a kid because I had this racist ballet teacher who, number one, told me, y'all are gonna flip, told me that, this is not even the worst one, to stop sticking out my bum. And I was like, this is how my body is shaped. Like you can check my alignment, but like not sticking out anything. So she picked on my body. And then one day, she was like, do you ever notice how Black people are never on the beat? And I was like,
First of all,
I can't.
Oh, no.
What?
No.
No.
and I was like, so only Black person in the class. I'm like 11 or something. And so everybody turns and looks at me. And in my head, I'm like, what Black people do you know? Like, I don't, like, what are you talking about, right? But like, that was not even a microaggression. That's like a macro aggression, right? And I remember getting out of the class and going into the car. My mom picked me up and she's like, what's the matter? And so I told her, and the way my mother put that car in park to like go in, and I was like, can we please just leave? Like, and like, I didn't let her, because I was like, I still have to go back and dance. I still have to go back to class. Like, I don't want to make this a thing. And I remember seeing that woman like 10 years later, and she didn't recognize me, and I knew exactly who she was. And I, at the time I was studying opera, and I was like, oh, you don't remember me, hey? And then when I told her who I was, she was like, oh, wow, what are you doing these days? I'm like, oh, I'm an opera singer. And she was like, really? And I was like, I'm not gonna swear, but I was like, girl.
No.
But like, how are you supposed to, this all comes back to representation. How are you supposed to thrive in settings where they are already dismantling you? Like, what I would have, like, and to this day, dance terrifies me. Like, it is the most stressful part of my job on any contract. When they're like, okay, choreo, I'm like, no. And if I'd had Black teachers, Black coworkers, Tara, you're the first person, like, doing Hairspray with you was the first contract where I got to work with Black people.
Right.
And it changed my life. Like, changed my life.
The first week when Color Purple ended, that first week, or the first week we ended rehearsals, I remember being like overwhelmed with emotion, just that I got to experience a room with so many people of color that early in my career. Because I was like talking to KB, being like, she's like, I've never had this, and she's been working for how many years? And I was like, the fact that I get to be like, this work is just so overwhelmingly important to me. And I can't even grasp level of importance because I don't have 20 years in the industry of not having that. Do you know what I mean? And anyway, I feel very fortunate, but it is life changing. And just one person, then to have a whole room of Black people, oh my gosh, addictive. Like, I was
it
like,
is.
I never felt more relaxed.
And it's so hard to go back. Like, once you've had it, you're like, I
don't want anything else.
Yes.
No,
it's so hard. It's so hard.
Yeah.
I will. Can I just add to both of your point? I mean,
of course.
Color Purple alone, don't get me started, because I remember the first day, but before we even start, just thinking, Massini, remember this, because it won't happen again. Like, just taking a moment to like try to grasp everything. But when you're speaking about when your experience in dance as a young girl, you know, I was lucky enough to, yes, grow up in Toronto. So there were a lot of opportunities to do different types of things. And I got to do ballet Creole when I was little. Like, so I was in a room, like a dance class full of Black people. And that was like my first instance of being around people and creating art, right? And then I went to Wexford, and that was a very diverse group as well. Going to that high school and doing different types of shows and like shaking up what is normally seen in a musical. But then when I went to Sheridan, it was kind of like what you've experienced was like flipped for me. Like, I experienced a lot of like diversity and blackness early on in my lifetime. But then when I matured and chose to do this as a career, and like, you know, go to school and study, it was very alarming for me. Like, what is that? Like, I was confused. I was so confused that there was no diversity because I'm so used to diversity. But it wasn't until I went to see a Stratford show that I had the first instance of, oh, I can't do this. Because I will never forget, it was like a class trip with my class from Sheridan, and we went to see 2 shows, and I didn't see anybody diverse on the stage. We got to have a talk back with some of the alumni in the cast, like from Sheridan, and firstly, none of them were of color. So that was the first thing for me. And secondly, it just felt like, I was like, so what's the point of me spending all of this money to not even get to do this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it just felt like I was sitting there wasting my time. And like, it was never a thing that was brought up by any teacher about needing to see people of color. It was kind of like, okay, you're the Black stereotype and we're going to put you in these roles and you can't do anything else. And anytime I try to do anything else, it was shut down. Like, that was nice, but like, you can't you can't do that. So I remember thinking, so I guess when I was young, it was the thing to do. It was a hobby. It felt like, okay, I was trying to explore a hobby. Now I need to let the hobby go and get it together. And I think until I realized that I took myself out of anything artistic, like, and I mean anything artistic. I didn't even sing at home. It was like not about that life at all. It wasn't until I think I was watching something like a concert on TV, and I felt so much pain. I was like I felt physically like I was dying inside because I missed it. I missed the joy of performing, and realized it doesn't, not seeing yourself is the reason why I should be wanting to perform, because there needs to be an example that it's possible. I need to be the example that it's possible. I refuse to sit and waste the gift that I was given, because not everybody is given the gift of being able to sing or act or perform, or even have the guts to. Some of them have it, but don't even have the guts to actually do it, right? And then, thank God, I followed that urge to want to get back into it, and decided I didn't need to follow the rules of what everybody else thought the path should be. But it's so interesting hearing how, like, in your early, like your experience early on in life, what that was like for you, because that happened later on in life for me, you know?
Yeah, it's fun, like when you say that, like, you had a lot of diversity and then like you got flipped around. Like, I had no diversity, and then I kept going into these institutions that had no diversity. So it was just like every new place was like, I'm like, yeah. I was like, status quo, like cool. Like at Randolph, I think we had like, well, at Queens, I was the only Black person in my year. At Randolph, there were 7 people of color. I think there were 3 of us that are Black identified. And we did hair, was our final show. And they gave me all of Dion's songs, but they gave the named part to a white actor. But I sang Aquarius, I sang Abe Lincoln, I sang I sang. Like, wow. I sang it all, but they gave the named part of Dion to a white actor.
Wow. That's crazy. Especially because Randolph was founded by a Black person.
Yes, but like, that doesn't really mean much, because in that same experience, when some of the white women in my graduating class were saying things like, I know they need their colored people in the show, but just stick them in a corner. Or aren't you in this number? I thought all the colored people were in Aquarius, like things like that. And when I brought that to the attention of the artistic director, and I was like, I brought it to the creative team first, and I was like, this needs to be addressed. And it was not addressed appropriately the following day. And I was like, okay. So I went to the artistic director and I said, you need to talk to this class about this because this is unacceptable. And then she said, well, you know that white people are the minority in Toronto now.
No.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, like literally. And I was like, that is not factual, you know, like, yeah. And it was like, well, what would you like me to say? And I was like, why do I have to do your job for you? And so it was, and I was like, if you don't deal with it, I'm going to go to George because it's like, and so they handled it.
Okay.
And it was horribly dealt with. But I kept calling that school out for years after. I would see like in the alumni bulletins, like, we're doing a workshop of this. And I would literally send George an email and be like, why are there no people of color in this workshop?
Right. It's just
and it's disappointing.
Yeah.
It's very disappointing. So, you know, the representation, yes, it has to happen at the casting level, but it has to happen at the admin levels. It has to happen at the creative team levels. You have to have diversity in your the voices that are running the company. Mm-hmm. You know, at Stratford, when I had my first season last year, they gave us a company handbook, and I was like, one person, I think she was Asian, I don't even remember, one person of color in the entire administrative team.
Mm-hmm.
And they wonder why the 5 Black women that were hired last season understood that they were hired as tokens for Little Shop of Horrors. And to be able, like, Black women would never have been put in Billy Elliot if the season wasn't rep and it didn't have to crosscast. It would never have happened.
So
it's the truth. And, you know, I turned down The Color Purple to go to Stratford because I wanted an opportunity to work in Stratford. And it was the hardest year of my life. Mm-hmm. From a creative standpoint. I have never felt less valued or seen or appreciated as I did working there. So when I got rehired for this season to play a Black Tinkerbell, I was like, okay, so Tinkerbell's Black, Wendy is Filipina, Peter is a brown-skinned man, and Tiger Lily is Indigenous. I'm like, great. This is all of the people are diverse. Like, this doesn't feel like tokenism. This feels like a vision. And then COVID happened.
But listen.
But like,
it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
But like the excitement of like being able to represent to young kids, for them to see that much diversity in like leading roles was so huge.
Yeah.
But it didn't come at a great emotional cost from the previous season. Like I almost didn't come back because I was like, I can't do it again to feel like I'm worthless.
Wow.
It makes me often wonder why, like, these white people that are either casting or just even a part of the like ensembles, if they're ever uncomfortable by only seeing white people. Like, it makes me genuinely wonder. I know some of them are like, oh, it's just like they don't see anything wrong with it because it's what they're used to. But I wonder if there's like that few that are like, hello. Like, I genuinely wonder.
Some people, I've had conversations with some white friends that are like, that's a lot of white.
Conversations with us. I want to know that they're having it with the white people. I want to know that white people are talking to white people about this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't need you to explain, oh, I was so uncomfortable when, I don't want to have that conversation with you. Because if you're uncomfortable, imagine how I feel. Like, I don't care how uncomfortable you are because you're used to this. But I'm wondering if they're with, like, each other having these conversations. I would love to know.
The answer is no until 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
That part.
Say it one more time.
If they are having a conversation, but that's the truth. Like, no, and that's why we are where we are.
Yeah.
Even working, even getting to do work at Wexford, you know, I was used, like, I mean, the entire creative team is white. Now, they gave a lot of opportunity to people of color. So I never felt slighted. Like, I never felt like I was a token there, right? But up to recently, I'm just like, so, like, are you guys going to change your creative team now? Not necessarily change, but, like, at least give opportunity to, because I understand you have a process, and I've always appreciated that process, because it's allowed me a lot of opportunity, and a lot of people of color, a lot of Black people specifically, many opportunities, doors opened for many rooms for us to enter. However, I need to see somebody of color in your staff, right? Like, it just, because at the end of the day, there needs to be somebody there so that I feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I'm not in the room, right, having those conversations, to be able to call them out, because, you know, we had a conversation, and I spoke to one of the creatives in their team, and I was like, look, you dropped the ball on this situation. Why wasn't this brought up when it came to Black people, you know? And they're like, we were having these conversations, we didn't know if it was all right. Well, that's why you need to have somebody of color in the room to be like, yes, say it for what it is, you know? And forever trying to be PC about things, like, no, being Black is not a political matter.
Yeah.
So,
I just had a flashback to doing this show where it was like, I won't go into details about it, but basically it was the cast was all 4 Black people and one guy who's Indigenous, Guatemalan, etc. And it was like basically hip hop influenced. But the whole creative team was white, so we would come in, they'd be like, we got the hip hop pants going. Like, it was just like really bad. And we would just come out being like, we got no one on the other side of the table to bend for us or any of this culture, and it's a really big problem. And obviously it sunk like the ship it was, but but it wouldn't, I mean, like, no, it was a great group, minus so many other things on the creative side of things. But it's just like, yes, we need people in those circles when you're having conversations about how you're costuming, how you're, like, hair, also just every facet, producing everything. It's like, you need people in those circles, or else it's like, what are you guys talking about? You don't know anything about this. Like, you don't know anything about even how to acknowledge us or what we need. And then when we tell you, you say, oh, but no, we can't do that. So it's like, well, what are you doing then? What are you helping? You're not. You feel like you are, but no, it's just a mess. Ugh. Anyway.
I am cautiously optimistic that they will. It's gonna be like a situation of, when we do get back to theater, what's happening, because all of this Black Lives Matter, like, we post Black Lives Matter on our thing, but you treat your Black actors this way, no, not gonna fly. So what are you gonna do? Who's losing their job?
Well, and there's all this time.
Yeah,
they have all this time because theater is not coming back anytime soon. So, like, restructure.
That's why it'll be more disappointing when most of them don't. You know what I mean?
I know. It's sad.
Because I'm like, yeah, they had all this time, but it's a choice.
It's
you know,
choice,
it's not like they've had a lot of time. I mean, now they have very obvious times, to the point where it's like, if you're not doing anything, unless we fully just boycott or something, it's like, they're like, a lot of companies don't care.
It's true.
And that's the bottom line. And it's sad, but I'm like,
they'll make money.
Yeah, and it makes me sad. But like, I see you, so good to know. I don't know. It's disappointing. It's what it is.
Yeah, they don't.
But I'm hopeful, but tired.
Changes, and I'm hopeful that they also recognize, like, all these companies and things doing anti-racism training doesn't help racists because they already hate us. So it's like, you telling, like, it doesn't help. I'm sorry, it doesn't help. It doesn't help unless people effectively aren't racist and are learning more things. The people who are racist don't care. Like FYI, equity and whoever else is doing these things doesn't work. But I mean, nice try, I guess.
Oh. I mean, was it
Like straight up, because it's just like enough is enough. It's too much showboating and too much like, look at us.
Yeah, it's like the bare minimum.
Bare things, like bare. Must do better.
Yeah.
On that note, I just want to thank you guys for coming to talk to us today. I wish we could do this in person. I'm hugging you virtually. I love you both very, very much. Thank you for sharing.
All.
And
thanks for having us.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having us.
Of course, you must. This is your space, your platform. So, thank you. And
I'm sorry for the technical difficulties.
Listen, it happens. It happens. Until next time, my loves.
Okay.
Bye.
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 Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and visit our website, musicaltokens.com, for your daily dose of